following program contains topical discussions related to suicide. If you are feeling suicidal or need help for yourself or someone you know, please dial 988 in the U.S. or contact your local mental health services.
Often it can be difficult to establish active postvention services in a community. Who do I talk to? And what do I need to know going in? We'll have those answers and more as we talk to Dr. Jan Gorniak right here on the Hope Debrief. And welcome to the Hope Debrief, a suicide bereavement caretaker conversation. I'm your host, Robbie Graham, and with me is my partner in crime, Denise Graham.
Hello, everyone.
And joining our conversation today is Dr. Jan Gorniak. Dr. Gorniak, welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Of course. Now, I'm going to try to go through your bio here and do it as briefly as I can because you have an illustrious career. And so I feel like I'm not going to do it justice, but I'm going to try my best. Dr. Gorniak is a doctor of osteopathic medicine with over 23 years of experience and also has a master's in health service administration and a master's in medical education. She is currently a contractor with forensic pathology staffing. In 2020, she was a medical examiner for Clark County, Las Vegas, Nevada. Prior to that, in 2016, Dr. Gorniak was named as the chief medical examiner in Fulton County, Georgia, serving the greater Atlanta area. And prior to that, she served as Deputy Chief Medical Examiner in the District of Columbia. And before that, and this is when Denise and I had the opportunity to meet and work with you, you spent 5 years as the Franklin County Coroner in Columbus, Ohio. And I did not know this fact. You served as its first full-time forensic pathologist coroner. I got to admit, Dr. Gorniak, that surprised me, considering how big the county is and the growth it's gone through. And I just know the little bit we worked with you guys, we saw the workload, and that you were the first full time is just kind of mind-boggling for me.
And I'm still the first full-time forensic pathologist coroner for Franklin County, because after I left, there have been two coroners, but neither one of them are forensic pathologists. It might be full-time, but they're not forensic pathologists.
Gotcha. So, Denise, before we get into our conversation with Dr. Gorniak, I know you've got some fantastic, great questions for her. I want to ask you this. A large part of what we're going to be talking about has to do with LOSS teams, LOSS teams. Would you take a moment and just kind of give a brief definition for anyone who may be watching or listening to this podcast who isn't aware of what that is?
Absolutely. LOSS teams. LOSS stands for Local Outreach to Suicide Survivors. And LOSS teams are unique, the L's being for local. It's a unique situation where people respond to the bereaved by suicide in the immediate aftermath based on what their community needs are and based on what their community infrastructure is. A lot of times, LOSS teams are dependent on coroner's offices. Some are dependent on law enforcement agencies to get that phone call that says, hey, we've got a probable suicide. We need you to send out a couple of your folks to provide emotional support. So when I think about LOSS teams, I think about teams, it's an active postvention model. So there's three things every LOSS team has in common, and they all begin with P, so that makes it easy. The first P is that it's proactive. We're not waiting for those newly bereaved people to find us and say, hey, do you have some services? I need help. We're going to them, and that's where it's so key that we have that relationship with law enforcement, with the coroner's office. The second P is that it's peer support driven. So a suicide loss survivor, somebody like myself or my husband, we lost our son to suicide. We've been through training. We go to the scene. At least one of the two people that goes to the scene has been impacted by a personal suicide loss themselves. And then the third P is the purpose. LOSS teams all have the same purpose, no matter where they are, and that's to be an installation of hope to the newly bereaved. We're not there to treat. We're not there to provide treatment. We're there to support. We're there to care. We're there to provide follow-up resources. Yeah, so I think those are the three P's: the proactive, it's peer-based, and we're there to be an installation of hope. That's our purpose.
Excellent, excellent definition. And with that said, I know, again, you've got some great questions, Dr. Gorniak, so I'm going to turn it over to you and let you guys engage in a wonderful conversation. So, Denise, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you. Dr. Gorniak, it is so good to see you. And I'm going to share some things with you today that you may not remember, but I know the first time I met you, it was in 2013. My son had died in 2012, and I learned about this lost team model, this idea of going out and supporting people, right? And I knew I needed to get in front of you. And the first time I got in front of you, I was so nervous. I can't even begin to tell you. You may not have realized that, but I was very, very nervous. And you made time for me, and I had a couple other folks with me, a couple of people that worked with the Suicide Prevention Coalition here in Franklin County. And on the hotline, that's 988 now. At the time, it wasn't 988, but it's 988 now. So the three of us met with you, and I walked through what a lost team was and why I thought we needed to do this in Columbus, Ohio, and throughout Franklin County. And I'll never forget looking at you at the end. I'm a bundle of nerves, and I said, "What questions do you have for me?" And you looked at me and you said, "Why haven't we done this sooner?" I will never forget that, because I knew it's like, okay, oh my gosh, she's going to buy into this. So I want to ask you why you saw the need for this right away. What appealed to you?
So I'm not sure if you know or you remember, but in 2008, actually, when I was running my campaign for Franklin County Coroner, I was a suicide hotline volunteer. So for me, I think everybody has been impacted or knows someone who has died by suicide. I've had friends, I've had a cousin, I've had friends, loved ones, and I think everybody is impacted. And when I worked with the suicide hotline, either going through the training was amazing, but getting some of the phone calls, or I worked as I was a forensic pathologist. I had worked in the Columbus office before I ran for coroner. I trained in Cleveland, and before I was doing this as a job, I didn't realize the impact that anybody who dies, at least 10 people, right? That's somebody. And so you also learn that when I was in Cleveland, they had grief counselors as part of their office, which I thought was amazing, because we can do the medicine side of things. We can talk about cause and manner of death, but actually working with people with their grief, we're not trained to do that, and so we seem sometimes, even personally still, I struggle with still just being able to be Jan and not Dr. Gorniak. Sometimes I have a hard time taking my jacket off. And so I know, working with suicide prevention, going out to scenes, that people are just literally left in the unknown. What next? And so I always look at it as we go in, we do our jobs. And then also when people die, there's people there right in the immediate aftermath of the death. So the death happens, and then the funeral happens, and then people are left alone. Right? Nobody starts coming to see you anymore, or if it was in the news, next it was news that day, and let's move on to the next. And so it was always something in me like, okay, we still need to help these people. People are being left alone. And I also know that survivors of suicide are now at a higher risk of suicide. So it was also a prevention. We have a public health role as forensic pathologists, medical examiners, coroners, as for public health. And this is, we can always talk about the drugs. Nobody wants to talk about the suicide. And I just wanted to make sure that one death from a suicide didn't lead to to another. So I thought it was very important that, suicide survivors get that support that they need, not just, because, and I read, it could be years before somebody reaches out. And so I think right now is when people need the support. Even if they don't accept it right now, at least they know it's there. There's an option, because some people have no clue that now they're sitting in it and saying, now what? And so I always talk about whatever kind of deaths that we deal with. I just had a conversation the other day. So what? Right? We can talk about all the statistics and how many people die by this means and that means in the coroner's office, but then so what? Right? And this is the so what. This is the why. It's beyond the cause and manner of death. This is what we need to do outside the four walls of the coroner's office or medical examiner's office.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Gosh, you brought up so many great points. Thank you so much. It is true that when you go to the scene of a suicide and you're there to support people that are left behind, sometimes there's shock, there's trauma, and trauma is different from grief. And I've seen, being on many scenes myself and supporting survivors, sometimes people don't want services. They're okay that you're there, but you're not there to go through resources and to say, now you need to call this, you need to this. We're not there for that purpose. We're there as that quiet, compassionate presence to leave resources behind so when they're ready, their timing. So I love that you brought that up. And there are so many people that are impacted. And I just, wow, that's just wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing your passion around that and the vision that you had for the importance of it. So that day, when we walked through it, of course, you were very quickly, yes, I see a need for this. I want to do this. What was on your mind, on your radar screen in terms of, okay, what are next steps? Because you can't just invite a couple of people to attend the scene of a suicide. What kinds of things were going through your mind that needed to be in place as far as the volunteers that were going to be present?
One of the main things that crossed my mind was getting the buy-in of other people, right? Just because I thought it was a great idea didn't mean my staff was going to think it was a great idea. Law enforcement was going to think it was a great idea. So I had to get buy-in just so that we're comfortable and understand, like you talk about, the purpose. Some people were apprehensive because, wait a minute, you're coming into the scene, you're talking to the family, you might disrupt something. Law enforcement might be like, of course, law enforcement's there to make sure a crime wasn't committed. And now you're bringing these other people into the scene and talking to the family members or the friends that are there. So that was the main obstacle that I saw. And then also, who are these people that are going to come in? You know what I mean? Are they going to be trained? Because just my experience doesn't make me an expert in helping somebody else.
That's right.
Right. So there has to be, is there training, and is it going to be a nurse? Is it going to be a social worker? Is it going to be child protective services? And then how are the families going to be reacting? You know what I mean? Like you said, this tragic incident just happened, and now all these people are here or calling me in my house, you know what I mean? So first and foremost, our duty is to the patient and then their family and friends. But how to incorporate that other side of it, which isn't really our job. It is part of what we do, but it's not our job. So just getting buy-in from, like I said, mostly my staff, and then bringing it out just to make sure everybody was comfortable, and that we were going to be able to respect each other's roles while we were there and manage expectations. That was a big thing. What are they going to do? Why are they going to talk to them? What if they say this? What if they do that? So managing expectations and getting buy-in was the main hurdle that I knew I had to tackle.
Yeah. I remember one of the follow-ups based on your feedback. We had a volunteer training where we invited law enforcement and yourself. I don't remember if anybody else from your office came, but I know you were there. And we asked you guys, as well as law enforcement, it was a couple of detectives from Columbus Police Department, as well as from the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. We asked them to speak. What do you want us, your audience of 30 or some potential volunteers, what do you want us to know? And that was an opportunity to really educate, I'm going to just say me, it was all of us, but to educate me more about, okay, what do we need to know about crime scene etiquette? What should we be cautious of? What do we need to be aware of? And it really helped us to create a code of conduct for our volunteers. And you had a hand in that, and your investigators had a hand in that, to look at that and really say, this is how we want you guys to behave, for lack of a better word, when you're on the scene. We wanted to make sure that we were, the integrity was there, the training was there, the equipping was there, that we planned for as many what-if scenarios as possible. So your partnership along the way, you and your team's partnership all along the way, really helped us to launch an effective loss team. So I'm very grateful for that.
You're welcome. I'm glad, and that was an important aspect of before launching, right? So, and it was a collaborative effort, right? Like neither one of us could get it done by ourselves, but at least that there were myself and others that saw, the purpose and the importance of it in the community, that we were able to get it done.
All right. Turn on my mic again. So at this point, I'm going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back to talk some more with Dr. Jan Gorniak, so you guys stay tuned. And welcome back to the Hope Debrief. I am Robbie Graham with Denise Graham, and we are having a conversation with Dr. Jan Gorniak about implementing active postvention services in communities. So with that said, Denise, I'm going to hand it back off to you and let you continue the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Jan, for being with us. A few more questions I have for you about loss teams and about overall support for people that are bereaved by suicide in that immediate aftermath, that trauma. So I'm curious, Las Vegas, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., you've been the coroner, the medical examiner in many large cities. Tell me what kinds of support for the bereaved by suicide was in place in some of those cities, if any.
So as I said before, I trained in Cleveland, and they had a grief counselor on staff, which I thought was fantastic. And I wanted to bring that model to Columbus. Unfortunately, it never panned out. This DC, and I'm not sure if they still do, but when I was in DC, they also had grief counselors at office. So I thought it was great. Not only did they work with family members, they also worked with the staff on, like I think once a month we would do maybe some arts and crafts things, or you know what I mean. But we can't forget about ourselves and the things that we see also. Atlanta, no, there was nothing, and Clark County, they might have, and I'm not sure, they might have gave a list of resources to send out, but nothing similar to a grief counselor in the office or a loss team or any postvention services at all. Because I know I would take phone calls and just, go back to some of my suicide hotline training to talk to people or just listen. And that's one of the hard things that we have to learn, is just to listen. We don't have to have answers. And that was one of my mentors when I trained in Cleveland. She taught me how to just be silent, which is the hardest thing to do. And then that was kind of when I trained for the suicide prevention hotline. They wanted you to go, yes, but in the dealing with family members and loved ones, it was better just to sit and let them speak, and answer any questions that they had and not interject anything personally or from what I thought they needed, and then able to give them resource. But very, very limited that I know of, like especially in the offices that I worked in. I'm also doing locums in Rhode Island right now, and I know they send resources in a letter to those family members, the next of kin, usually the next of kin. And that's another thing. We need it's not just the next of kin, right? There's other families and friends that are impacted by this. So it's a farther reach than just the next of kin. I think that's another stopgap or a little hiccup or hurdle that needs to be, tackled also to just get everybody wrapped in, but not much of, brief support in any of the offices that I worked in.
Yeah. And I have to ask, why do you think that is? Larger communities, I would think, now you're more on the inside, so forgive my ignorance here. These are large communities. Surely they have the resources, the financial resources to be able to do more, whether it be for the staff, like you said, around self-care, self-compassion, and how you navigate that day in and day out, but also for those that are left behind and being able to provide support. Why isn't there more out there?
Sorry,
in your opinion.
Yeah, well, there's two things. Right now, the world is changing, as we all know. I believe, even though we talk about this next generation, I think they've got it right. Whether you call it work-life balance or just taking time, wellness and well-being, we really didn't think about that much. We would go and do our jobs and, see what we see. It wasn't our job to really deal with the family except for the medical side of it. So now people are becoming more educated. So we're not stuck in our ways of how we were trained, how we were training other people. Mm-hmm. Actually, I was in Maryland last year for a suicide prevention type seminar, and there was other forensic pathologists, medical examiners there, and other representatives of some medical examiners' offices. And I was shocked that people didn't know about postvention. That was like new. They're like, what? So actually, at our National Association of Medical Examiners annual meeting last year in San Jose, one of the doctors that was there actually presented, this new this new concept, right? But it was not new, but it was new to them. And she almost won an award for the public health, right? It was that good, but unfortunately, somebody else eked her out on another important topic, which is also important when we talk about LGBTQ, right? And their risk in that we're seeing more of that. So I say that because that topic, that person who presented won the public health award, because that's very important. But those are things we just didn't talk about, right? So the postvention is like new to people. They didn't realize it exists. Some obviously think it's very important to present it at a national conference. And so that's how the word is getting out. So mainly, I think it's ignorance. If you don't know what you don't know. And so I always say, Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better. And so I think people are starting to know better.
Yeah.
And so that's how it's going to change.
Yeah, that makes sense. This was nowhere on my radar until after I became a suicide loss survivor. It was nowhere on my screen at all. So, you know better, you do better. Very good. Very good. I have one more very important question for you. And that is, we've got up and coming Lost Team leaders and volunteers that are going to be listening to this podcast. We really want them to know, in your opinion, your relationship, the relationship with the coroner, medical examiner, or law enforcement is so important. And sometimes it's a hard hurdle to get over because people are hesitant to invite others on the scene, which I understand. What one piece of advice do you have for those up and coming teams for how they can win credibility and your support?
That's a fantastic question. I would just say, don't give up. Don't take no for an answer. Right? It's we can't go over the wall, go around it. Knock it down. So if it's, you can find one person, you can find somebody. Our networks are large, or reach out to an office that has a team and say, well, how did you do it? And get the quote unquote success stories and how it's working. And there's been no failures, or if there has been, how they learned from it. And then they can, advise the up and coming teams what they can do, who to talk with. I would just say, if it's important, right? And obviously it is important, not to give up. I mean, I have all these little nuggets in my head, and I always say, if it's important to you, you find a way. If it's not, you find an excuse. So there's no excuses, right?
Yeah.
Because our job isn't just about, like I said, determining cause and manner. It's part of that. So what? What next? Because the worst thing to do is to have a case, which we've had, where you end up with another suicide on the anniversary of their father's suicide, or close around to their birthday, or my friend. There's clusters where I remember, which was interesting, when I was in Clark County. We also did a presentation on that during COVID, when the students weren't in school. The governor saw our data and was just like, okay, there's 17 school-aged children that have died by suicide during the COVID school year. We got to get these kids back in school. So our numbers mean something, you know what I mean? Because we were losing kids while they weren't in school.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that some of those things that came out of that was also with the child fatality review committees. So that's where we were seeing them. And then you can get some recommendations on what to do. But I thought that was amazing that the governor was just like, look what's happening in Clark County, Las Vegas, and Clark County, Nevada. We need to get these kids back in school. So reach out to, political leaders. But I would say start with the coroner, medical examiner in a city, county where it's working. And then go from there if you're having any problems. But if it's important, and it is, you will find a way.
That's a great idea. Thank you. Thank you. I remember one of the takeaways from our meeting was you asked me to put together just bullet point topic that you could use to talk to your staff, to talk to law enforcement. And it just set me up with something brief that tells me the importance of this, what it's going to look like, how the volunteers are going to be trained. Just give me the basics so that I can speak to this and I can champion that. And I was so glad you did that. It really helped me to pause and think about succinctly, what do I want Dr. Gorniak to know when she goes to the plate and says, hey, we need to do this. We need to do this, and we're going to do this. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. And I believe I remember some of your stories, right? So hearing from people who this was their reality and what they needed, not that what I want to give you, right? What I think that I know what you need to say what you need. And I believe it was you. And one of the things was like to see somebody still moving on, right? That, you see somebody and like, oh my goodness, you go to the grocery store you know what I mean? You can wake up the next day and still, you can not get through it, you know what I mean? But
Right.
life is, you're going to start going grocery shopping again. You're going to have to start doing this again. And to see somebody who, was like, yes, I know what it is now, but in time, and whatever time that is, you will be able to continue. And simple things as getting up and brushing your teeth and going grocery shopping, and then also celebrating other things. I know it's difficult,
Yeah.
or I have no idea what to say to you, or anything except to listen when your son's birthday comes around, or holidays, or his date of death. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there's probably other people who have sat in that position before, and you can relate to them more so, because I can't. You know what I mean? It may not be the same story, but like you say, the hope, right?
Yeah.
There's hope, that you will be able to carry on. So I think those personal stories, if they can tell other personal stories on what you might have needed, or what helped when you were going, you had that situation in your life, telling those stories, that resonates with a lot of coroners and forensic pathologists. So I think that's another thing that they can do. Put a true story, a true person in front of them and say, this is what I needed and I didn't get it.
Yes.
Or this is what I needed and I got it, and look where I am today. Those would definitely be another bit of advice I would tell them.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being with us today, Dr. Gorniak. It's great to see you. I wish it was in person, but
I know,
I'll take
but thank you
this.
so much. Thank you for what you're doing. I know it's not easy, but this is what you're supposed to be doing, and I'm so proud of you,
Thank
for
you.
doing this, the two of you. So I'm honored. I'm honored to have been asked to talk with you today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Denise, thank you as well for your wonderful questions. And I do want to thank Dr. Gorniak as we wrap up here for joining us today. And if you haven't done it already, please make sure that you like this episode, because it's a great one, as well as going to your favorite podcast, wherever you get your podcast from, and make sure that you subscribe so that you keep getting this wonderful content that we're bringing out. And so thank you guys for listening and for watching, and we hope to see you soon right here on the Hope Debrief.